All right, so first off, just to remind everybody, I am recording the chat, so I'll be posting the video when we're finished. Now, I don't know if you know this person here, this famous actor. So maybe you know his name is Charlie Chaplin, and I'm a big Charlie Chaplin fan. So this is a scene from probably one of his funniest movies called The Gold Rush. So in the movie, he's kind of in this cabin trapped in the snow. So he can't leave his cabin. So things are getting very desperate. So he decides to put on this little show to make the other people in the cabin happy. So maybe you feel like Charlie here in this scene. Okay, well, first off, let's talk about our agenda. So our agenda this morning is we've got a couple of new things that we're going to add. So first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to use a new sign-in process. Again, we have to keep track of students coming to our classes. So I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing every time we get together for a chat. And that is we're going to be doing a sign-in process. So let me go ahead and share that with you real quickly. So again, in just a moment in the chat feature, I'm going to send you a link. And when that link appears in the chat, what I would like for you to do is you're going to click on the link. It's going to look like this, kind of a whole bunch of numbers, and it says Docs, Google, and so on. What I want you to do is to click on that link. Now, that link is going to take you to the sign-in form. Because again, we have to keep track of who's coming to our classes. So when you open the link, it will kind of look like this. It'll say sign in. And what I need for you to do is to put your email address and your name in the sign-in form. Okay. And then when you're ready, okay, so again, when you fill out the information, you will see at the bottom of the screen when you're finished, it'll say submit. Okay, so you'll click on the submit button and you'll get a message that looks like this. It will say your response has been recorded. Okay, now this is really important for us because this helps us keep track of the students who are coming to our online chats. Now, when your response has been recorded, again, if you're using your phones or, for example, the iPhone, you might have this little green space here around the number, the time on your phone. So when you see the response has been recorded, then all you need to do is to click on that little green part next to the time to return to the meeting. In fact, you'll still hear me talking while you're filling out the form. So you'll just need to return to the meeting. And again, you can return by clicking on that green spot right up here in order to return. So I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to stop the presentation. So in the chat box, I'm going to send you right now in the chat box the sign-in form. Okay, so guys, you'll see this sign-in form in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to save that link. Okay, so everybody right now in the chat box, in fact, it may appear on your screen. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Okay, so everybody, if you can go ahead now and click on that link and go and sign in for me. Okay. Our expression of the day, maybe you have a similar expression in your language. So the expression of the day is be in the same boat. Everyone say that with me. Be in the same boat. Now, to be in the same boat basically means that we're in the same situation as everyone else. Now, many times we use this expression in a negative way. So if we're all in the same problem, if we all have the same problems. So if you'll notice in my picture here, notice the men in the boat here at the end. You know, they don't seem too worried, right? If you notice, it says, sure glad the hole isn't at our end. Yeah, so they think that their part of the boat's going to be fine, but their part of the boat is not. But the truth is, they're all in the same boat. They're all in the same situation. So again, this is an expression that maybe we can think about for right now. So if you notice, I said in my example, everyone is in the same boat right now. We're all worried about what's happening in the world. So I know some of you, even since last week, our situation continues to change. In many cases, it's in some places it's getting worse. Some places maybe a little better. So, but right now it's hard to think about it. But maybe if we think we're all in the same boat, maybe we can all think about how to solve this situation. Okay, so here's our chat question of the day. And again, you can use your microphone if you like, or if you want to use the chat box. But let's think about this question here. Some people are having a very difficult time right now during this situation, from losing their job to worrying about the future. So, what is something you're worried about right now? When you think about this situation, what's something that maybe you're thinking about? Are you worried about? Are you worried about some particular part of the future? Are you worried about the economy? So, again, if we're all in the same boat, maybe we can try to help each other in this situation. So, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. And again, if you want in the chat box or if you want to use your microphone, tell us something. Is there something you're thinking about right now? And maybe we can be here to help encourage or support. So again, maybe if you want to share something with us, you can. You can use your mic, or if you want to just use the chat box. Okay? So again, tell us what's something maybe you're worried about right now. Well, guys, for our grammar portion of our discussion this morning, we're going to go back and talk a little bit more about some of those words we discussed last week, some of those connecting words. So again, thinking about simple sentences and complex sentences, that's what we're going to be looking at here today. Now, first off, let's take a moment and review. Again, we talked about this a few weeks ago, or a long time ago now, but let's kind of review some of the information that we're going to be practicing with this week. So first off, let's talk about a simple sentence. Now, again, when we say simple sentence, that does not mean that it's an easy sentence. A simple sentence means that it has only one subject and one verb relationship. So we would call this an independent clause. Everyone say that, independent clause. Now, for example, here is an example of a simple sentence. So for example, I brushed my teeth. Yeah, very simple sentence. I brushed my teeth. Now, in this case, this is a simple sentence because it has only one subject and one verb relationship. So again, this whole sentence here, we could call an independent clause. We don't need any other information connected to this particular sentence. So again, in this independent clause, we have a subject. So in this case, the subject is I. And then we have a verb. And the verb in this case is brushed. So I brushed my teeth. So again, this is a simple sentence because we have only one subject and one verb. Now, in the lesson last week, we did start to learn some words, connecting words, that helped us connect two sentences to make information a little more interesting. So we called these, we're going to call these complex sentences. So everyone, let's say that, complex sentence. Okay? Now, a complex sentence is when we use two or more clauses, but the clauses themselves are going to be a little different. Now, first, we still have that one independent clause, that one original idea. So again, I'm going to keep I brushed my teeth here in the sentence. But last week, we introduced some words that help add information to the sentence. Now, this week, we're going to actually use some specific words to describe them. So for example, this part of the sentence here, so I added this part. Before I went to work, I brushed my teeth, right? Remember that comma there for the pause, okay? Well, first off, this particular sentence is referred to as a dependent clause. So everyone, let's say that, dependent clause, okay? So this is a complex sentence because we have an independent clause and we have a dependent clause. Now we call it a dependent clause because it depends on the other part of the sentence for more information. We also call it a dependent clause because it uses that connecting word. Now, in grammar, we refer to this connecting word in a very formal way. We call it a subordinating connector or a subordinate connector. So that's a big word, I know. So you can say that with me, subordinating connector. Yeah, so in this case, we call it subordinating because it's kind of connecting to the main or independent part of the sentence. But what I want to show you is the dependent clause includes that connecting word. So whenever I see that connecting word, this tells me that it's introducing this particular idea. Before I went to work. Okay? So a complex sentence is when I have two or more of these subject-verb relationships, but that I also use these connecting words like before. Okay? Now, subordinating connectors really help kind of tell us what kind of relationship we're describing in these kinds of sentences. So for example, if you look on the left side, look at the examples I have here. So complex sentences use these connectors to describe relationships of time. So for example, the words we learned last week, like before, after, and when, tell us when things happen. Do they happen before something, after something, at the moment? They can tell us relationships of purpose or reason. So again, they tell us why, because of this, or why they did this. This week, you're going to practice a little bit with some conditional relationships. Now, some of you might remember conditional relationships from our last session. Of course, again, that was a long time ago now. But these are situations that often use words like if. If this happens, then this can happen. We also have relationships of location, where something happened. And then finally, we have descriptive relationships. So relationships that tell, for example, who is that particular person that we're talking about, or connecting it to some idea and describing more about what that idea is. So again, words like who, that, or which. Now, everyone, look on the right side of the screen. Say these words with me, because again, if we can learn these connectors, then we can recognize that they help give more interesting information. So here are some examples of subordinate connectors. Everyone say these together. Before, after, when, if, because, while, who, that, which. Now, these are just some examples, but you probably recognize many of these. You probably know all of these, but the idea is these particular connecting words help tell us more interesting pieces of information. So they give us more information than just simple sentences do. Now, you might remember last week when we talked about complex, when we described before and after and so on, we talked about how some of these sentences are very flexible. We can change the place of where these clauses go. So again, many complex sentences can place the dependent clause either at the beginning of a sentence or at the end. So again, look at my two examples here. Before I went to work, I brushed my teeth. I brushed my teeth before I went to work. So notice here we moved, right? We moved the dependent clause to the end of the sentence. Now you might recall that when we put the clause at the beginning, we do have a slight difference in punctuation. So can you remember where the difference in punctuation is? Again, look at the two examples. Well, if you notice that little punctuation mark right here, yeah, that little thing I have there in orange, that is the comma. So the comma is what we use when we put the dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence to separate the two ideas. Now, the thing I want to share with you this morning is that you can switch the independent and dependent clauses when you're using subordinate connectors to discuss time or condition. So again, most of the time you can switch the two, but there is a situation where we normally don't switch the two. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit next. You can't switch in these situations. So again, when we use those words like who, that, or which, we normally don't switch the sentences around. So again, we refer to these as adjective connectors. Now you might remember adjectives are words that describe. So these particular words like who, that, and which, they often will follow the word they're describing. So let's look over on the right side. Look at some of these examples here. So for example, look at my first sentence. So it says, the person who is sitting next to the door is my friend. Now this is a correct use of the word who, because in this case, we use the word who after the person we're describing. Now, if I were to remove this part of the sentence, then the sentence would be very simple. If I just said the person is my friend, well, that sentence is perfectly fine. It's not very interesting. So in this case, we add this dependent clause to tell us, well, which person are you talking about? There could be many people in the room. Now, what I want you to notice, though, is we cannot switch the sentence around. Who is sitting next to the door is my friend, the person. We can't move it because now we don't know who is the person we're describing. So in this case, we cannot move the particular dependent clause. It has to follow the word that it's describing. Okay, here's one more example. So notice it says, I can come to the party that you invited me to. Now, again, if I just look at the part of the sentence that is the independent part, I can come to the party. Well, again, that sentence is perfectly fine. It's correct. But I added this information to tell us specifically which party are you talking about? Oh, the party that you invited me to. So in this case, it's telling us, well, okay, which party are we talking about? Now, can I move this clause? Can I move it to the beginning of the sentence? Well, in this case, we cannot. That you invited me to, I can come to the party. Well, as you can see, that doesn't make any sense at all. So the reason I wanted to mention this is words like who, that, or which, when they're used as connecting words, we cannot move them in the sentence. We must keep them in their particular place after the word they describe. Okay? All right, so let's review what we were talking about so far. So again, this morning, we're looking at the difference between simple sentences and complex sentences. So once again, remember, a simple sentence uses only one subject and verb relationship. So again, we refer to that as the independent clause. So again, in my example here, he likes to watch TV. So again, this entire sentence is an independent clause. It's independent because I have one subject and one verb, and I don't have any other connecting words in the sentence. So in this case, this is a simple sentence. Now, of course, it's a simple sentence, but it's not very interesting. So again, complex sentences, they use that information, that independent clause, but then they also add a dependent clause to tell us more information. So for example, he likes to watch TV when he is bored. So in this case, again, the independent clause, right? He likes to watch TV, but then we added this other information, when he is bored. So once again, this part is the dependent clause. And then the word when is the connector. That's the subordinating connector that we use in this case. So in this case, complex sentences help to give us more information. And that's what you're going to be practicing with a little bit with me in our speaking activities, but also in our work for homework for this week. Okay, so in just a moment, I'm going to show you what are some things you're going to be doing this week. Again, when I send out information, I'm sending these notifications out from Google Calendar. So again, I might recommend that you check your junk mail, but I may also go back to just sending emails to the group. It's possible that the mails from the Google Calendar might be in your junk mail. So that can happen if your email does not recognize that these are coming from my calendar. So I wanted to make sure we understood that, okay? Okay, now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this week. Okay, so I've got two activities that I want you to do. So first off, in the Burlington English platform, we're continuing with the lesson 8, housing in the low intermediate level. And this week we're going to be practicing, again, using some grammar. So thinking about the if statements. So again, these are the present real conditional sentences. We'll take a look at those here in just a moment. And then there is an activity called life skills, which is, again, practicing a little bit with applications. And then finally, I do have a simple and complex sentences activity. So I'm going to show you that activity first. So I'm going to stop here for just a moment, and I'm going to show you the okay, so the simple and complex activity will look like this. So you'll get an email with this information here soon after class. Now in the activity, again, you'll sign in. So you'll put your name and email address. And then I have a few activities that I would like for you to do. So for example, in the next activity in the form, you have to find the dependent clause. So where the dependent clause begins and where it ends. So again, we're going to demonstrate that in our Burlington English in just a moment. But in this example, you have to type in the answers. So again, if you have a computer, if you're using your phone, it might be better to use a computer if you can, but you can type the answers there. In section 3, we're talking about how to rewrite these complex sentences. So if you remember something we did in our homework for last time, we talked about how to switch the sentences. Can I move one part of the sentence to the beginning or not? So if you notice in the instructions, so again, look very carefully there. I'm going to zoom in. The instructions say, in the following activity, rewrite the following complex sentences by switching the dependent clause around. So if you cannot switch the sentence, then you will write you can't switch. So let's look at the two examples just to make sure we understand. So in example number 1, it says, would you like to come to the party when you are finished working? Now, in this sentence, can we switch or not? Well, if you notice, again, where it says when, we learned last week that yes, you can switch with the word when, but we do need to use the correct punctuation. So in the sample answer, it says, when you are finished working, comma, would you like to come to the party? So again, notice we can switch this sentence. All right, now look at example number 2. Example number 2 says, the man who is sitting next to the door is my best friend. Now, if you remember from our lesson today, the word who is the connecting word. So can I switch those around? Well, if you notice, the answer says no, we can't. We cannot switch. So in this case, you would type the answer, can't switch. Okay? So that is section number 3, rewriting the complex sentences. Okay? And then finally, in the last activity, these are just parts where you get to answer with your own information. So again, you can answer by following and just typing in your own answer in these 3 examples. And this is actually similar to what you're going to do in the speaking activity with me, is basically practice a little bit of how to follow that information. Okay? So that is the simple and complex activity that I'm going to be emailing you. Now, let's take just a moment and look at Burlington English before we finish here today to make sure we understand, okay, what we're going to be doing in the Burlington English activity. So again, we're in the low intermediate level. So again, this week we're practicing with lessons 6 and 7. So the present real conditional. So again, the present real conditional, just to remind everybody, again, we've talked about conditionals before, but just to review, again, a conditional is when we use the word if in the sentence. So if you notice in these 2 examples here, where the person on the left says, you don't need a car if you live in a big city. So again, notice that word if is introducing a dependent clause. So in this case, you could move this to the beginning of the sentence. If you live in a big city, comma, you don't need a car. Now notice what he says. He says, that's true, but cities are so noisy. I like small towns. So again, in this particular lesson, you're going to be practicing with another specific kind of dependent clause, the conditional, the if sentence. And again, in this case, we're calling this the present real. Some of you might remember we talked a little bit about real and not real situations, but for now, we're just going to focus on the real conditions. But again, if you look at this next activity, if you'll notice on the screen, you're going to be doing a little reading, but you notice we see that word if. So again, these if statements are telling us a condition, some sort of condition that you're going to have to follow. So we'll be practicing with that in this activity. Okay. Now, for example, in this activity, it says you're going to find these sentences and highlight. Well, that's very similar to what we talked about this morning. Where do the clauses begin and where do they end? Now, if you remember with this particular activity, you have to use the screen. So for example, as I'm looking through, let's find that first example of the word if. I'm going to zoom in just for a moment so you can see it a little better. So take a look at the sentence, take a look at the paragraph. So it says living with grandparents. In some families, grandparents live with their children and grandchildren. There are advantages to this. Many older people get lonely if they live by themselves. Now, if you notice here, I see that word if. Okay, so there is that connector. Now, in the activity, what they want you to do is to highlight the clause. So the dependent clause. So we begin with the word if. Now, the question is, where are we going to stop? So for example, should I stop here? Should I stop here? Now, in this case, the clause continues all the way to the end of the sentence. And then I'm going to use the highlighter to highlight that particular part of the sentence. So in this activity, you're going to go through and find all of those dependent clauses and highlight them. So again, you have to use your finger or use your keys, your keyboard first, and then you can highlight them. And then of course, if you need to erase anything, you can use the eraser too. So again, in this particular activity, you're going to be practicing with another kind of dependent clause, the one using the word if. Okay? So finally, when it comes to homework, please do these particular activities. So in Burlington English, do activity 6 and activity 7, grammar, present real conditional, and the life skills activity. And then do that simple and complex sentence activity that I'm going to be sending to you. Now, with this activity, you'll have to finish it, and then I have to return it to you after I look at your answers. So the idea is you need to finish it before next Tuesday, April 14th, and then I'll send it back to you. Okay? All right, now before we finish up here today, so a couple of things just to remind everybody. Our next chat's going to be on Tuesday next week. So again, 10 to 11. So I appreciate everybody joining us here this morning.